Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm drawing two of my viewers' Gacha Club characters. Gacha Club is an app that recently came out. It's a newer version of the app Gacha Life, and many of you, including my sisters, told me about it. In Gacha Club, there are more customization features, and I'm excited to see what characters you all make. If you want to know how to submit your character for me to possibly draw in a future video, all of the info is in the description. So the first character that was randomly picked was created by Jade. The character's name is Meadow Springs, and she is 12 years old. Meadow loves going to the beach with her family and friend. It helps her relax from the stress of school and bullies. So let's start drawing Meadow. Because Meadow likes going to the beach and because it's currently summer where I live, I thought it'd be really fun to draw Meadow having fun at the beach. This seemed like a simple concept, but I actually had a really hard time deciding on an idea. Mostly because there are so many things to do at the beach, like building sandcastles, playing in the water, maybe eating like a snow cone or something. I knew I wanted to include the ocean in the background, but I wanted Meadow to be looking at us also. So I was trying to think of a situation that would include those two things. I decided on having Meadow run through the water while holding a beach ball. I thought maybe she was playing with it with her friend, and when it went into the water, she had to go get the ball. And so she's coming back from grabbing the ball out of the water, and the water is kind of splashing up from the ocean. Now I'm working on my cleanup sketch. Her pose was a little tricky to draw because her upper body is turning away, while her lower body is turning towards us. Thankfully, I was able to find some references to help out with the pose and the background. I spent so much time scrolling through pictures on Pinterest and Google trying to find stuff to inspire me. Meadow's design is super cute. I love her hair and her outfit. She is 12 years old, and I tried my best to keep that in mind while drawing her. The preteen years can be tricky to draw because they're still kind of kid-like, but they're also starting to look more like a teenager. Like, one of my sisters is now 11 and she's starting to look like a teen. I'm just like, my little Rue is growing up. What's going on? She's supposed to stay tiny. Oh, also, I decided to have her not wear the sandals. I figured since she's at the beach and running in the water and stuff, she would probably take off her sandals and go around barefoot. I quickly sketch in the background. It's not too complicated. We have the splashing water and the ocean in the background. I will be adding a little bit of land in the background later on. Next, I start working on the line art, and yeah, I don't have much to say about it. So I'll stop talking for a few seconds and let you watch a little bit of the line art process. Now I'm starting to fill in the colors of the background. For the ocean, I fill it in a tealy blue color and then make it fade to a sandy tan color. This suggests that the water is getting clearer and getting less deep as it comes towards us. Next, I use a textured pen to make the wave of water that's coming in. I'll clean this up and add a little bit more detail later on. Next, I'm trying to get the rough shape of what I want the water to be when it's splashing up. I have drawn splashing water in the past, but I can't remember how I did it. So I'm actually going to go back and watch the video that I did this in. It was a Patreon exclusive video I released ages ago, back when my Patreon was first open. So I'll be learning from my past self. For the ocean, I applied a water texture to it that Clip Studio Paint has. I made it a light blue, and for the sky, I used one provided by Clip Studio because I get lazy sometimes. So after going back and watching the Patreon video, I learned that to make the splashing water, I used a random dot brush to make the shape of the water. Then I connect some of the water with a normal pen so that the water isn't all separated, like some of it's connected. The thing about using the dot brush in this case is that the particles of water are all circles, so they don't really show the motion of the water and how it's splashing. So I made pretty much all the dots into more oval kind of shapes, or like stretched out shapes, to make them look like they have more movement to them. Then I go in with a light tealy blue and make a bunch of different splotches of color that follow the way the water is splashing. This will help the water feel like it has more dimension, I guess. I don't know. It won't look like it's one big white blob, it'll look a little bit more like water. After getting the background in place, I am now working on Meadow. Since she is at the beach and it's very sunny, we are going to be getting some harsher, more dramatic shadows. Like her head is casting a pretty large one onto her body. Her shirt is flowing out a lot, so it also casts a shadow onto her lower torso area. I add a little bit of cel shading to her face for areas that have harder edged shadows. Like under the hair, I also fill in her mouth with the shadow color. Now I'll start adding more softer shadows. For this picture, I'm using a lot of warm colors for the shading, like warm reds, oranges, and purples. Her arm and hand were a little tricky to shade. I was trying to shade it in a way that the hand and the arm didn't all look like one thing, if that makes sense. I played around with the shading a lot in this area. I kept applying shadow and erasing it and applying and erasing and I just kept doing that until I was pleased. Shading her black shorts went smoothly. Also, I hope it's okay I modified her outfit a little bit. I made the shirt a little longer and I made her shorts high-waisted. She is young, so I wanted to keep her outfit kind of modest and kid-like. Oh, also, I forgot the sleeves on her shirt. I don't know how I forgot them, but when I finished the picture, I noticed she didn't have the sleeves, so I apologize for that. And if I try to add them now, they probably look kind of out of place because of all the different filters and stuff I added. So yeah, I apologize for forgetting the sleeves. Adding the pattern on her shirt was a lot of fun and it made it feel so much more fancy and detailed. It makes me want to play around with patterns on clothing in my sketchbook. I really want to do that. It's a simple way to make a simple article of clothing feel not so simple. Next up is the hair. I always love shading the hair. One part that did confuse me a little was this X shape that wraps around her bangs. I didn't totally know how to make sense of it, so I kind of just slapped it on there without thinking about it too much. Oh, and also, I tried something new with the hair. I selected the color of the hair and made a new layer above all of my other layers, then added little strands of hair to help the hair feel more hair-like, I guess. I've seen some artists that I follow on Instagram do this, and I wanted to try it out myself because I thought it'd look really neat. I'm pleased with the results. It's interesting how adding just a few stray hairs can make the hair feel like it has so much more movement. I definitely want to try doing this more in the future. Lastly, for Meadow, we have the eyes. Her eyes are really interesting. They are very light blue with a dark brown pupil and then a pink outline. I don't think I've ever drawn an eye with a different colored outline than what's inside the eye. It's kind of cool looking. I did tone down the pink a little bit later on, just because I felt like it was a little hard to see her irises because they had such a light outline. So I made the irises brown on top and then they fade to a pink towards the bottom. Now I just need to shade the beach ball. I was kind of amused while shading the beach ball because it felt like I was doing one of those lighting studies that you often see on the internet, like where you shade the little ball and apply different lighting to it. I actually got to apply that to an actual picture. My favorite part about the ball is the water dripping off of it. I used a white and then slightly lowered the opacity, and I drew some of the drops kind of going to the side to suggest that the ball is kind of moving. Now it's time for the finishing details. I make a new layer above all of my other layers, set it to the blending mode, add glow, and then add some rays of light. I always think adding rays of light makes things look more majestic, I guess. I can't really think of a word for it. One new thing I tried is adding some subtle noise to the picture. So noise is kind of like this little texture of like dots. I don't totally know how to describe it. I've seen some artists I follow on Instagram do this, and I find it helps the picture feel a little more natural and not so digital. It's a very subtle difference, but I do like how it looks. And ta-da! Here is the finished picture of Meadow Springs. Thank you so much to Jade for submitting your character. I had so much fun drawing her at the beach. The next character I'm drawing was created by Mariana123p on Twitter. The character's name is Kelly, and she is 21 years old. Kelly is a hero in secret. She tries her best to protect her loved ones and the innocent. So let's start drawing Kelly. Because Kelly is a hero in secret, I decided I wanted to draw her in an action pose. The hardest part was deciding on a pose. I was looking around on Pinterest for inspiration. I was searching things like firepower poses, action poses, hero poses, but nothing was really inspiring me or just didn't seem quite right. I was about to give up and just kind of start drawing whatever came to mind. But then I went to like my Pinterest home area and this picture of the figure skater Yuzuru Hanyu popped up. And when I saw it, I was like, huh, that could work. So I base her pose off of this pose. I really like the position of the arms and how the torso is turned. So I tried to incorporate that into Kelly's pose. I kept my rough sketch very loose. I was trying to make sure I got the motion that I wanted in place before adding all of the details and focusing on the anatomy and stuff. After doing that, I started to tighten things up a bit. Now, at first I was kind of trying to add the details too early. I did have my rough sketch in place, but I didn't fully understand what the body was doing because I was going straight in with the clothes instead of drawing the body underneath first. Because of that, this first attempt looks pretty wonky and kind of weird. So I got rid of that and started mapping out where the different parts of the body were and how they were turned. This really helped me better understand what the body was doing, especially the torso and how it was bending and kind of coming towards us, and what perspective it's in. This bent leg gave me so much trouble and I drew it so many times. My reference picture wasn't much help when it came to the legs because of how they were positioned, and Yuzuru is wearing ice skates, so that also makes it different. So I was trying my best to figure out the perspective of the legs. At first I had the one leg that's bending going kind of out, but this didn't really make much sense and it felt a little awkward, so I made it turn more inwards. Because the lower leg is bending back, there's a lot of foreshortening on the lower leg, and this is always kind of tricky for me to draw. I tried my best and I played around with it for a really long time. So next I'm working on my cleanup sketch now that I have a better idea of what the body is doing. I can now start adding the clothes on top. The clothes were a lot of fun to draw, especially her sweater vest thingy. I don't know what it's called, but it was a lot of fun to draw it flowing because of her movement, and it added kind of some movement to her pose. Oh, also, I did forget about the rips in her jeans. Sorry about that. I tried to add them later on after finishing the picture, but they just kept looking really out of place, so I decided not to add them. Her hands gave me a little bit of trouble just because they're in kind of complicated poses. But I wasn't too worried about making them perfect, I'm putting air quotes, because I knew the firepower would probably be mostly covering them up later on. I did want to get them to a place where I kind of made sure that I liked them because I wasn't totally sure how much the fire would be covering them. So I got them to a point where I felt like, yeah, they're decent. Like I mentioned, legs were giving me issues. I edited them even more when I wasn't filming. At first I had the foot on this leg pointed like she was jumping or something, but then I decided to make it planted on the ground a bit. It felt more dramatic that way. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to draw the foot in this position without it looking broken, but I feel like it turned out okay, so that's good. Now that the sketching is done, it's time for the line art. I am using the textured pen. I used this in my previous Gacha character video and I quite liked it. I like the rougher, more natural feel, and I thought it would suit this picture nicely. One thing I really like about this pen is that it's really easy to get different thicknesses and variation in my line art. Like when I apply less pressure to the pen, it gets super duper thin, and when I press a bit harder, it gets way thicker. My G pen kind of does this, but it's very slight and isn't as noticeable. I want to figure out a way to make the G pen behave like the textured pen, but without the texture, because I don't always want the texture, but I do like how I can get better line variation with it. And now it's time to move on to the background. And oh boy, this one gave me trouble. I made the mistake of fully drawing the character first without thinking about the background. And I always find backgrounds harder to draw when I do this because I have to make it match the character. But I don't totally know what the background is doing. So this first background, yes, there's going to be multiple backgrounds, is taking place in an alley. I decided to mostly just use blocks of color, and I was being a little lazy because my plan was to draw a kind of simple background and then blur it with motion blur to make it look like Kelly is moving really fast. I like the concept, but not the execution. Because I didn't spend much time on the background and just expected the motion blur to kind of hide the imperfections, it just kind of ended up looking weird and I didn't really like it. So yeah, I scrapped that background. I was feeling kind of annoyed when I decided to scrap it because I did spend a little over an hour drawing the background and trying to make it work and stuff, but it just wouldn't, so it was kind of frustrating. The first picture in this video took me 3 hours, and this one took me 6 hours, mostly because of the background issues. So for the second background, I was feeling a little defeated, and I decided to just drag in a background from Clip Studio, and I roughly colored and shaded it. I didn't hate it, so I kept it for a little bit. For Kelly, I added these lines of color coming off of her. I thought this would help express that she is moving, and it's almost kind of like speed lines, but with color. This is the first time I've done this in illustration, and I kind of liked the effect. I'm starting to focus a little more on Kelly now and more of her shading. I am pleased with how the shading on her face turned out, especially around her nose and the bridge of her nose and the eyebrows. I'm also really happy with her facial expression. I feel like she looks really brave and like she's going to go kick some tush. Because this is taking place at night, I'm using a lot of cool colors like blues and greeny blues for the shadows and the highlights. For the shadows, I use more of darker, kind of slightly warmer blues. And then for the highlights, I use more greeny blues. So yeah. So I thought this background was okay, but it felt kind of boring and not very dramatic. I still liked my alley concept better, so I thought I would give it one last try. For the two previous backgrounds, I kept focusing on the motion blur aspect of the background, but for this one, I decided to just totally forget about the motion blur and just focus on the background. I went onto the Clip Studio asset library and found some really cool 3D models. I found this one of this wall, and you wouldn't think a model of a wall would be helpful because I mean, it's just a wall. It's not that complicated, but man, this one was so helpful. It was really great being able to just drag the walls around and see what they would look like in different spots. I also found this electrical pole model. I thought adding this would help better express the background and how far back it goes. The mistake I made with my first background is that I didn't make a grid or perspective lines to help me understand the background and the scaling. Because of this, it felt really short and out of proportion. In the future, I'm going to make sure to add perspective grids and lines when figuring out the backgrounds, because they are very helpful. After getting all the different props in place, I click the Extract Outline button, and this gives me an outline of all of the 3D models. I then make a new layer above the models and set it to multiply so I can easily color them in. Oh, I also clip this layer to the 3D model layer. I basically didn't draw anything in the background myself. I do wish I could have drawn the background, but I was getting close to just giving up altogether on the background and just add a flat layer of color or something. So I'm happy I could get a result that I liked and that executed my idea, even though I had to use the 3D models. To help everything feel cohesive, I add some gradients to the background to help them match the shading on Kelly. Speaking of Kelly, let's finish shading her. I've spent most of this time talking about the background. I am shading her eyes. They were a real nice treat to work on and I enjoyed coloring them so much. The eyes will always be my favorite thing to color. Her eyes are really cool because they're kind of a yellowy color on the bottom and they kind of fade to a slightly pinky color on the top, almost kind of like her hair. Her hair was really interesting to color because it is the pink on top and then fades to a light yellow. She also has this purple bit of hair. It looks blue because of the lighting situation, but I did fill it in with purple. All of the purples look blue because of the filter layers I'm using. I usually apply these filters at the very end because it can be really tricky to color with these turned on because they slightly change your colors. So they look different when you apply them compared to what you're picking over in your color wheel. But I kind of felt like I needed them in this case to help me further push the dark time lighting situation. For the highlight on the hair, I made it a light blue instead of making it like the lighter version of the hair. I thought this looked kind of neat. Now it's time to add the light coming from the fire. I was looking forward to this the entire time I was working on this picture. I was really excited for it. I used a mixture of yellow and purple set to the layer mode hard light. I tried different layer modes and I liked how this one looked the best. Because it makes the colors really vibrant, but they still kind of look like they're glowing. Like the layer mode add glow does make things look like it's glowing, but it often makes it look kind of white, whereas hard light kind of adds a glowing effect, but it still keeps the saturation of the color. Now I was thinking about leaving the picture like this, but I really wanted to try adding the motion blur one more time to see if I could make it work. So I merged all of my layers together so everything is on one layer. And then I duplicate that base layer and applied motion blur to it. I then erased the blur where I don't want it to be. I mostly erased it around the face and some parts of the body that I wanted to be more in focus. I did keep a lot of her blurred just because I thought it really helped express that she was moving. I'm happy I decided to add the motion blur. I think it's a fun effect. And here we go. Here's my finished picture of Kelly. Thank you so much to Mariana123P for submitting your character. She is really cool and encouraged me to try new things with this illustration. Also, I want to give a big thank you to this channel's patrons. I have reopened my Patreon page. It's been closed for about a year now, but now it's back. On Patreon, I post weekly updates of what I'm working on and behind the scenes stuff and what I do in my sketchbook. And me and my patrons chat about art and stuff. If you'd like to become a part of the Patreon community, there is a link to my page in the description. Well, that is all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!